Hello everyone, welcome to Mr. Noctory, boring ancient history stories for sleep. Tonight, we're diving into a world where jealousy wasn't just in the eyes. It came with laws, daggers, and even the Senate. Jealousy in Rome showed up in satire, stage plays, and graffiti on the walls. Augustus banned adultery to protect noble bloodlines. There was a law allowing husbands to kill the lover if caught in bed. Men had the right to use female slaves, visit brothels, fall in love with poets, and brag about it. Jealousy in Rome wasn't just personal emotion, it was social policy carved into law. Before we begin, if you find this a nice place to rest your tired soul at night, please like and subscribe, but only if you truly want to. Just like the rules in an ancient tavern. Only when you need a quiet corner. And you know what I love most? Reading the comments, seeing where you're from and what time it is now. Whether it's New York or Norway, 1 in the morning or 5 in the morning, you're still here. And I see you. Now, turn off the lights. Turn on a small fan if you have one. Not for the heat, but for the soft hum. You think jealousy is a private matter? In Rome there was no such thing as private. Your love belonged to the state. Your jealousy was written into legal code. There were clauses, penalties, loopholes for noblemen to sneak through. And then, in 18 before the Common Era, Augustus, the first emperor, declared something no one dared say before. Adultery is a threat to the survival of the empire. And so, Lex Julia de Adulteriis Coascendis was born. Sounds ancient. Let's compare. Today, you might get fined for leaking a private photo of your ex. In Rome, you were encouraged to report someone if they stepped over a stranger's doorstep after sunset. From report on social media, they moved to report in court, with blood, witnesses, and inscriptions on stone. A law against adultery sounds noble, but the real goal, not morality, but the number of legal citizens with Roman blood. Augustus feared the noble class was too busy loving poets, actors, and slaves, and not busy enough making legal heirs. So he did the most logical thing a powerful, panicked man could do. He turned jealousy into a civic duty. Need a vivid example? Meet Julia, Augustus's own daughter. She was once the symbol of beauty and talent in Rome. But after several uncontrolled affairs, Julia was exiled by her own father. Not because he didn't love her, but because the legal population was slipping. In Rome, you didn't have to be a commoner to get punished for loving the wrong person. You could be a princess and still get exiled for damaging the state's image. But Roman jealousy had class tiers. If you were a noble, jealousy could be a tearful drama, with lawyers, lawsuits, and a small banquet after trial. If you were a slave, jealousy wasn't a human right. You only had the right to be silent, sold elsewhere, and remember not to repeat that emotion at your new master's house. In fact, Romans didn't just live by law, they bent it like an art. Some gentlemen avoided jealousy by never coming home on time. No catching, no crime. And the noble women, when caught with a stranger, many used the classic line, "I thought that was my husband's slave." By law, a married woman caught cheating, her father could kill her if caught in the act. The husband couldn't kill his wife, but could imprison and sell the lover. Not the wife, the other guy. And if the husband didn't sue within 60 days, the neighbors had the right to sue for him. Yes, you heard that right. In Rome, if you found your neighbor sleeping with the wrong person, you weren't just allowed to gossip, you were allowed to formally sue. As a good citizen protecting public virtue, If you were a man in ancient Rome, congratulations. Society didn't just excuse your jealousy, it endorsed it. And if you cheated, no one judged. They called you experienced. Roman men were allowed to visit brothels, befriend slaves, fall for poets, send gifts to stage actresses. Even high-status figures like Marcus Antonius, known for his fiery romance with Cleopatra, were regularly brought up in the Senate, not for glory, but for overly loud dates with actresses. Cicero once mocked Antonius, saying he couldn't tell the difference between a goddess and an actress, and that he left the scent of Egyptian perfume on both his cloak and the Constitution. Yet he was still praised as family man, in a flexible sense. Today, a man with 3 lovers is called toxic. In Rome, he was hailed as a model citizen, contributing to the genetic diversity of the empire. A patriotic kind of love, very Roman. You could have a wife at home, a mistress in the suburbs, and a slave boy who played lyre in your country villa. All within moral boundaries, as long as you weren't too public and paid on time. And if you were jealous, you had the right to act if your wife was out of control. Meaning, if you caught her, felt suspicious, or someone whispered during dinner after 3 cups of honey wine, then you could file charges, demand justice against her lover, aka the violator of honor, and in some cases, act before court even opened. One record tells of a Roman man who discovered his wife with a household slave. He didn't sue, he didn't scream, he just quietly sold the slave to Syria, with a note, for betraying the master without permission. In that love triangle, the one punished was the one with the lowest income. And if you were the one being suspected, no problem. Just say, "I'm a man." That sentence could erase all evidence in many Augustan courts, and the one condemned, usually, the woman who dared to be jealous. A world where men had the right to feel, to act, to boast of conquests, and the right to walk away without looking back. You're a Roman woman. You see your husband come home with a strange perfume, a red lipstick mark on his toga collar, and a pouch of Greek love poems. You get angry, you cry, you're jealous. Wrong. You're not jealous. You have a problem with your uterus. In ancient Roman medicine, jealousy in women wasn't considered a valid emotion. It was lumped in with seizures, anxiety, fainting, insomnia, delirium, and had a name: wandering womb, uterus errands. They believed the uterus was a creature that moved. It could leave its original position, crawl up to the liver, the heart, even into the throat. And when it got lost, it caused behavioral disorders, especially behaviors like asking questions. Today, if you're jealous, a doctor might ask, "Do you need rest?" And if you're a bit sharp in a group chat, they call you sensitive. But in Rome, if you sigh in the wrong tone, they'd ask. In Rome, the doctor would ask, "Is your uterus in your throat or in your spleen?" Maybe it's the same sadness, but Rome described it with an organ chart. You're upset because your husband cheated. The physician will prescribe inhaling rosemary, steaming your abdomen, lying on your left side to guide the womb back to its original position. And if it still doesn't work, place a piece of raw meat near your genitals, because the uterus, according to them, loved rich fatty smells. No one asks, "What did the man do?" Everyone only asks, "Where is her uterus now?" Jealousy, in men, is a sign of honor. Jealousy, in women, is a neurological symptom. It doesn't need justice. It needs essential oils, raw meat, and silence. You could be a noble, You could be a general's wife, but if you cry too much, speak too loudly, or look at your husband with cold eyes, you'd be sent for rest in a villa far from the city, with no letters, no court, just rosemary and a tired lyre repeating the same song every day, diagnosed with wandering womb, requiring music and cumin seeds to calm. There's a record of a Roman noblewoman, Flaminia, locked in a villa for 7 years by her husband for having a skeptical tendency. Doctors concluded her womb stopped at the chest, where jealousy and poetry are produced. Romans didn't write poetry about jealous women. They wrote satire, tragedies, and sometimes warnings about women who talk too much after dinner. They wrote satire. While jealous men were seen as warriors defending honor, jealous women were seen as emotional puppets whose mouths needed to be sewn shut with licorice and meditation. If you've ever felt jealous, ever hurt from love, ever been called too sensitive, know that you're not alone. You're not crazy. You're just living in a world too good at diagnosing what it refuses to understand. Ever caught your lover texting at 2 a.m? If you lived in Rome, you didn't need to argue. You just killed, and the law would consider you a hot-tempered but reasonable citizen. Ancient Rome had a very special law. If a husband caught his wife cheating inside the house, he had the right to kill her lover, right then and there. No trial needed. But you couldn't just kill anyone. You could only kill if the lover was a legal Roman citizen of equal or higher status. If it was a slave, a stage actor, or a foreigner. Sorry, you'd have to file a formal lawsuit. Jealousy could be a weapon, but only if you were jealous of someone in your own class. You just needed to summon 2 witnesses and ensure the killing happened in accordance with legal procedure. A simple example. You come home from work, hear a strange noise in the bedroom, open the door, see your wife and a young man you don't recognize. You shout, "Justice!" 2 neighbors rush in, confirm the scene. Don't think they did it out of love for justice. In Rome, witnessing bloodshed in a noble's bedroom was a kind of social honor. Some even saw it as a chance to be part of history, and sometimes got invited to stay for dinner. You pick up a knife, stab the man. No prosecution. Simple summary. Jealousy was valid if you had allies and living proof. But that didn't apply to women. If a wife caught her husband cheating, no stabbing, no lawsuits, no public rage, even if your heart was breaking and the dagger was within reach. There's a record of a Roman noblewoman murdered by her husband simply because she slept with one of his political rivals. What enraged him wasn't the sex. It was that she had handed over power with her body to another political faction, a kind of bedroom alliance beyond the empire of family control. She was only allowed just enough reaction to not be called mentally ill. See Chapter 3. There's even a famous case recorded by Seneca. A man killed his wife's lover, then sat down to eat dinner with the corpse still in the house, as a way to release emotion. The court acquitted him with the verdict. He acted within the bounds of family honor. The irony is, in many cases, men weren't angry because they were betrayed. They were angry because they weren't the first to know. Angry because their friends laughed behind their backs. Angry because they lost control of genetic property. Because in Roman society, a wife wasn't just a partner. A wife was the legal reproductive channel for inheritance. If you're a Roman man, always carry a knife when coming home early. And if you're a Roman woman, always lock your door. not because you fear strangers, but because you fear someone you know. Ever been jealous and called your mum to cry? In Rome, your father didn't just listen. He had the right to kill. Yes, really. You didn't read that wrong. If you were a married woman caught cheating, your biological father could kill you. Today, parents might write a 600-word post defending their daughter's heartbreak. In Rome, your father didn't write posts. He wrote an execution file, in blood, on the floor, and kill your lover too, without being prosecuted. Why? Because in Rome, honor didn't belong to you. It belonged to your family, especially your father. A daughter was a reproductive honor asset. Another way to say, you were a political object with a womb. In Rome, daughters weren't seen as individuals. They were extensions of the household, valued by their fertility, obedience, and level of silence after being betrayed. A political investment to be protected at all costs. And if that investment was offended by a strange man, the father had the right to retrieve it by force. Under Lex Julia, if a father caught his daughter cheating in his own house, he could kill both lovers on the spot. But if it happened in someone else's house, he had to hold back, because killing people in someone else's home was a bit rude. Note, fathers couldn't kill based on rumors or love poems. They had to catch it red-handed, meaning in an intimate position, inside a room the father legally owned. Jealousy in Rome didn't accept second-hand accounts. It required a full scene, with lighting and audio. There's a story of an old man named Marcus. He caught his daughter studying poetry with a young poet in the library. Without a word, he killed them both, and the court acquitted him, with the reason he was heartbroken and acted in accordance with fatherly duty. The cruel part is, your father might not know your boyfriend's name, might not know how old your child is, but if he caught you violating the reproductive empire, he became the Supreme People's Court with lightweight weapons. And if you're thinking, what about the mother? Oh no, the mother had to stay silent. By law, she wasn't allowed to interfere, not allowed to kill, not allowed to speak up. But many Roman mothers chose to cook a really good dinner after the murder, a way to soothe the family atmosphere, as if saying, there was bloodshed today, but the barley soup is still sweet. Roman women had no right to kill, no right to accuse, no right to defend their daughters, only the right to mop the floor when it was all over. If you've ever felt like love wasn't enough to keep you alive, but your father's jealousy could decide who gets buried first, you're not wrong. If you think drama, love triangles, and getting cancelled are specialties of modern social media, allow me to introduce CLÓDIA, a Roman noblewoman from the 1st century before the Common Era, rich, famous, and the reason half the Roman political world lost sleep. CLÓDIA was the sister of Publius Clodius, an infamous politician. She was beautiful, smart, sharp, and completely uninterested in the moral standards of her time. She loved poets, she loved actors, she loved anyone who wasn't her husband. And if you ask, did anyone dare say it out loud? The answer is yes. Cicero, Rome's greatest orator, once stood in court and called her a woman who can't tell the difference between a bed and an altar. She doesn't need a home, just a windbreaker wall every time she sleeps with someone new. Though to be fair, Cicero might have just been jealous he wasn't invited. CLÓDIA was accused of poisoning her lover, a young man named Caelius. She didn't go to court, because under Roman law, Women weren't allowed to defend themselves. They only had the right to become the main topic of someone else's trial. But her name echoed through the hearing as Cicero, defending Caelius, used half his speech to smear CLÓDIA. He never used her name, just called her the jealous goddess, a woman who lived on wine, lust, and broken taste. CLÓDIA didn't respond. She didn't need to. All of Rome knew Caelius had once been her lover, and now he'd betrayed her. She did the one thing a jealous goddess knows how to do: drag the ex to court for murder, even without a body. This love story had no love poems, only charges, no tears, only wine, gifts, and love letters read out loud in court. One letter she wrote to Caelius was read aloud by Cicero. "If you don't come tonight, wine will, and it's not as gentle as you." No one knew what it proved, but the courtroom went silent because it was that good. Ancient Rome, where the courtroom was also the stage of love, and you could be convicted just for loving someone more eloquent than you. If you've ever had an ex turn their back on you and dreamed of a trial where everything was exposed, remember, CLÓDIA lived that dream, with golden shoes, red wine, and an empire watching. If you've ever been jealous and texted your ex at 3 a.m, stay calm, because MESSALINA, Roman Empress, didn't text. She threw a wedding while her husband was still alive. Setting: Rome, 1st century after the Common Era. Claudius, Roman Emperor, was a clumsy, slightly stuttering man, too busy studying mushrooms to notice what his wife was up to. MESSALINA, young, beautiful, powerful, wasn't into fungi. She was into men. And one fine day she decided to promote her favorite lover, Gaius Silius, a young noble, tall, poetic, and conveniently unmarried, because MESSALINA had relocated his wife. No one believed it, but according to Tacitus and Suetonius, MESSALINA held an actual wedding with Silius. If this were today, she'd probably livestream it on Instagram with the caption, "True love needs no approval," and the hashtag, "married while married," in broad daylight with music, guests, and a marriage certificate. She didn't divorce, didn't ask permission, didn't need a reason. She married because she wanted to. MESSALINA wasn't jealous because she was betrayed. She was jealous because she was ignored, treated like a piece of palace decor, a royal furnishing that needed no maintenance, because she believed Claudius wouldn't dare act, because she was jealous, not of other women, but of her husband's coldness. The price paid. Claudius eventually found out. At first he asked 3 times. A real wedding? People joked. He studied mushrooms, but didn't see one growing in his own palace. He didn't hear it from his wife, but from terrified servants, some crying as they told the story. The mushroom-studying emperor immediately halted his research, signed Silius's death warrant, and hesitated with MESSALINA, because he still loved her, still wanted to forgive. But a close slave acted first, killing her with a dagger in the royal garden. She died in the garden, still holding a piece of her wedding dress. No one stood beside her. No music, no wine, only falling leaves and a history that never forgives a woman who marries twice without dying once, as she begged to speak her final words. Jealousy, when it belongs to someone powerful and no longer afraid, becomes a wedding, a declaration, a reckless move, and one of the most legendary counterblows in Roman imperial history. If MESSALINA married her lover for a rebellious heart, then AGRIPPINA married her uncle for the throne. And if you think that's chilling enough, Wait until you learn she got jealous of her own son. Agrippina was the mother of Nero. Jealousy is usually stalking your ex on Instagram. Jealousy Agrippina style was forcing the emperor to change marriage laws and putting your son on the throne, just so no one could ignore you at dinner parties. But before being a mother, she was a master of climbing power through marriage. She married Claudius, Roman emperor, who also happened to be her biological uncle. Incest laws? Claudius changed them because she was too persuasive. She didn't marry for love. She married so that her son, Nero, could become heir to the throne, and she succeeded. She once sat directly behind the throne when Nero addressed the public, and some say every time Nero wanted to speak, she nodded or frowned to grant permission. A teenage emperor, and his mom as a live prompter. Claudius adopted Nero. Nero became emperor. Agrippina became the most powerful imperial mother in ancient Europe. But then, the jealousy began. As Nero grew up, got a girlfriend, a lover, his own advisors, she began losing control. No longer the whisper beside the throne. She was pushed back to the second row of history. Agrippina wasn't called emperor, had no official title, only suspicious glances from senators, and rumors she was the only person Claudius feared more than the Senate. And she was jealous. Not of romantic betrayal, but of power betrayal. Jealous of whom? Jealous of Seneca, Nero's tutor. Jealous of Poppaea, Nero's later mistress. Jealous even of the statues in the palace hall that didn't bear her name. She once showed up at an imperial conference, uninvited, unheard, but still, stood in the center, staring with eyes that said, "You'll all see." And then, the end. Nero, the son she raised to the throne, became the first in Roman history to hire someone to kill his mother. Agrippina's death was a tragic and absurd drama. Killing your mother isn't easy, especially a mother who taught you how to hide daggers and use words like poison. One assassin fell down because she slapped him. One was lured to another room. One finally succeeded, but she still got the last line. The first killer failed. The second was tricked. The third stabbed once, and she said, "Strike my womb, the place that bore him." Jealousy, when tied to the throne, needs no tears, no love poems. Just silence, calculation, and the ability to turn a family tree into a chessboard. If you've ever seen your mum post a passive-aggressive status because you didn't call, just remember, one mother built an empire, only to be torn down by her own son, in a fit of royal jealousy. No knives, no death sentence, no blood on the marble floor, just eyes. In Rome, public baths weren't just for washing bodies, they were for washing gossip and drying off jealousy with stairs sharp as blades, leaving no trace. Inside the thermae, steam and naked truth. You walk in, naked, sit next to a government official's wife whispering to her best friend about a mole in a sensitive spot on her husband's body. Then you hear your name whispered through the steam. I heard she was invited to the governor's villa. Not everyone gets invited. At night. You look away, but you know, the rumor has bathed, dressed, and is walking out the front door. Jealousy in the bathhouse is an art. No violence, no words. A woman wearing her towel loosely at the hips is seductive. Two women with the same towel wrap. Psychological warfare. Roman women weren't allowed to fight, weren't allowed to accuse one another. In a society where women were banned from political debate, the bathhouse became their only stage for practicing power, through glances, posture, and shampoo scent. So they scrutinized skin, scrutinized hair, scrutinized the way you stepped into the hot pool. You missed covering your chest. You're flaunting. You laughed too loudly. You've got nothing to hide. You walked too confidently, clearly hiding something big and important. Jealousy through tone. Oh, your dress today is so simple. I heard you know a very special way to massage. No one speaks loudly. No one speaks directly. But everyone hears. And if you ask, has anyone ever died from jealousy in the bathhouse? No. At least not on the spot. But many were exiled from society because of a whisper from a bath, a glance from the steam room, or a sigh without an address. If you've ever felt judged walking into a yoga class, or someone asked, "How have you been lately?" with a weird smile, then congratulations. You've just touched Roman bathhouse culture, 2,000 years unchanged. Night falls over the red-tiled roofs of Palatine. The scent of marble, ashes, and dried jasmine lingers in the woolen cloak. You lie in a nameless room. Next to you is Messalina, not the emperor's wife, but the dream of every woman who ever got jealous, ever loved, ever went too far. When jealousy is no longer a feeling, it's a memory. It's the look someone gave you in the bathhouse. It's the poem you never dared to write. It's the question, if I'm not as beautiful as them, then who am I? Jealous of shadows. You look into the mirror, and you're not sure if you're the one being loved or the one afraid of being replaced. You recall the laughter at a festival, the gaze of someone in a chariot, and wonder, was I ever the main character, or just a side role with a good cloak? Falling asleep with Messalina. She says nothing. She once loved too, once held a wedding at night, simply because she couldn't stand being forgotten. You and she are not the same, but you understand her. And as the footsteps of the guards fade, and the rumors fall silent like stone, you gently close your eyes, not to forget, but to keep. A whisper no one heard, a glance no one returned, a pillow, and a history scratched by invisible nails. Arging. Who were the Philistines? An explanation of the history of the Philistines. Fight. Around 1200 years before the Common Era, the ancient world experienced one of the greatest upheavals humanity had ever seen, and strangely, no one survived to tell the whole story. Kingdoms once towering like myth vanished. Around 1190 before the Common Era, the Hittite Empire, which had controlled nearly all of Anatolia and northern Canaan, completely collapsed after a series of famines and invasions. The capital, Hattusa, was burned to the ground and never rebuilt. To the west, the Mycenaean civilization of Greece, which left behind grand palaces and the legends of Achilles, also disappeared within decades. Cities were abandoned. Writing was forgotten. In Ugarit, a prosperous trading city on the Mediterranean coast, the last king managed to send a desperate letter for help, but the ship carrying it never arrived. The city was destroyed before a reply could reach it. The Hittite Empire, once Egypt's equal, fell. Mycenae, the civilization that laid the foundation for Greek epics, went up in flames. Canaanite city-states were left deserted. Even Egypt, the immovable monument, rocked like a ship stuck in a storm. Modern scholars call it the Bronze Age collapse. But to those who lived through it, there was no name. Only hunger, only chaos, and lands, once crowded like markets, suddenly silent as graveyards. No one knows exactly why, but people mention prolonged drought, climate change, disease, civil unrest, and something else. A strange group of people arriving by boat from unknown origins, bringing weapons, women, children, and unfamiliar religious symbols. They came, not to negotiate, but to survive. And they didn't look like an army. They brought women, children, ox carts, livestock, and basic household tools. They didn't build war camps, they built settlements. Among them were the elderly, worn down by a long journey. They didn't come to conquer. They came as the last remnants of a shattered world, yearning for land to farm, a place to rest, and a life to rebuild. Egyptian inscriptions called them the Sea Peoples. Among these mysterious groups, one name appears repeatedly in the stone reliefs of Medinet Habu, the victory temple of Ramses III. That name was Peliset. No one knows where they came from. They left behind no texts, no epics, no identifying symbols. Just a nameless people, stateless, with no clear path, drifting in the death throes of empires. And somehow they survived. When the great powers fell, they didn't fall with them. They became the settlers of a new land, a land no one truly wanted to claim. Their presence is a historical paradox, because those without roots became the first to lay down roots in a post-apocalyptic land. They didn't name it themselves, but future generations would call it Philistia, and call them Philistines. While ancient empires crumbled like pillars with no foundation, one unexpected group slowly entered history, not through conquest, but through persistent existence amid the silence of collapse. The Egyptians did not welcome strangers. They built walls, set up garrisons, recorded every soldier, every grain of wheat, and above all, they hated what they couldn't control. And yet, around 1175 before the Common Era, it was Ramses III, the last pharaoh who could still call himself great, who left behind a strange record. He didn't kill all the Sea Peoples. He chose to settle a group called the Peliset in the southwestern region of Canaan. A decision that seemed militarily reasonable. A decision that would create a new people. Why did Ramses III do it? To understand that choice, we need to look at Egypt's condition around 1175 before the Common Era. After a series of invasions by Sea Peoples, this southern kingdom had been severely weakened. Resources were depleted, taxes dwindled, and expeditionary armies were wearing thin. Ramses III was no longer the pharaoh of great campaigns. He had become the pharaoh of defense. And with that mindset, settling the Peliset was not mercy, but a strategic calculation. Perhaps because Egypt was exhausted after defending the delta, with temples burned, merchant ships looted, and farmers fleeing their lands in fear. Or perhaps because he understood the value of turning enemies into border guards. In the inscriptions at Medinet Habu, Ramses III wrote that he brought the Peliset in and settled them in his fortresses, placing them under the pharaoh's name to guard the northeastern border. The Philistines, literally, were enemies fed by Egypt to become a shield, and the land they were given was not a promised land. According to many archaeological records and texts from the New Kingdom period, this land stretched along the southwestern coast of Canaan, from Gaza to Ashkelon. It had once been a heavily contested border zone, where Egyptian garrisons were abandoned after Pharaoh's control system collapsed in the late 13th century before the Common Era. The area was both geographically and strategically difficult. Salty soil, low rainfall, frequent raids from nomadic groups or armed traders. No one really wanted to live there, but the Philistines had no other choice. It was a hot, arid strip of coastline, wedged between Egypt's core territory and the smouldering ruins of Canaan. And they took it. They couldn't survive alone. The early Peliset groups were forced to negotiate with the remaining Canaanite communities in the area. Farmers, traders, and equally exhausted refugees. They shared well water, traded food for tools, rebuilt roofs together. Some Canaanites taught them how to farm the coastal wastelands, while the Peliset brought shipbuilding skills, ironworking, and combat techniques. From those fragments, a hybrid identity began to form. Not pure, but resilient. They pitched tents. They rebuilt the broken walls of old fortresses. And no one knew, within those quiet walls, a new identity was quietly emerging. Philistia had no coat of arms, no founding myth, no founder, no historian, only families who survived, people with nothing left to remember, so they were forced to begin again, while the old empires tried to rebuild their glory with stone, bronze, and gold. A silent group used only earth, ash, and memory to construct a new civilization, with no manifesto, only survival, no throne, no crown, no divine dynasty behind them. Yet Philistia grew, quietly, like a shrub rising through stone, planted by no one. As the chaos of the post-Bronze Age subsided, an ancient kingdom still reeled from the collapse of the 12th century before the Common Era. A strange structure began forming along the southwestern coast of Canaan. Not an empire, not a temporary alliance, but 5 autonomous city-states, 5 nodes in a silent yet resilient network that would later be called Philistia. Their names, etched deep in the Bible, archaeology and legend: Ashdod, Ashkelon, Ekron, Gath, Gaza. Each place its own world. Each city built atop the ashes of old fortresses, old bricks, old wells. Yet each pulsed with a new rhythm. The clang of metalwork, the call of merchants docking ships, the chatter of children learning to speak in hybrid tongues. There were no kings, only 5 leaders, called Seranim, who formed a council, sometimes united, sometimes rivaling, but always enough to maintain a fragile balance. No capital city, no royal palace, no central court. They only met when war threatened, or when trade routes were blocked. Decisions were pragmatic, devoid of religion, free of elaborate rituals. At times, Ashdod and Gaza competed over tax hubs. Once, Ekron refused to share olive oil profits with Gath. Philistia endured not through perfect unity, but because no one was strong enough to swallow the rest. Philistia was the embodiment of imperfection that survived. Each of the 5 cities had its own temperament, shaped by geography and molded by the way people clawed through chaos. Ashkelon, hugging the sea, was the only one with a natural harbor deep enough for large ships. It became the trade gateway to Cyprus and the Aegean, where Greek, Egyptian, and Semitic languages overlapped with the crashing waves. Ekron thrived in the 11th century before the Common Era, with over 100 olive oil presses, far more than needed domestically, proving they produced for export. The whole city may have smelled like olives and sun-dried pulp. Gath, inland and fortified, played a military role. There, hammers on iron, horses neighing at dawn, and non-stop blacksmiths made the city seem like it breathed through metal. Despite their differences, all 5 cities existed, not because of royal blood, but because of the hands of survivors. Ashkelon faced the sea and became the main port. Gaza sat on the trade route between Egypt and the Levant, and grew wealthy from tolls. Ekron gradually became the region's largest olive oil producer. Ashdod rose from ruin to become a logistics hub, and Gath, which would later give rise to Goliath, was a military center, training cavalry, blacksmiths, and mercenaries. Without a founding myth, Philistia was forced to shape identity through trade, warfare, and survival. They weren't chosen by gods. No prophets wrote books about them. Philistine identity didn't stem from revelation, but from a bond between people and soil, between manual labor and the instinct to live. Modern archaeologists find in Philistine ruins few distinct religious symbols, but many tools, cooking stoves, fishing hooks, pottery shards, and weapons, showing a society that built its identity through daily action rather than ritual. Their walls weren't as high as Egypt's, nor as splendid as Assyria's, but they were made from rubble of old homes, mixed with fresh dirt and the sweat of survivors. They weren't just fortifications, but silent chronicles. In each stone, the handprint of someone with no historian, no title. These walls held no royal insignia, but preserved the memory of bare hands building a new world from ash. Philistia needed no ivory towers, because every rooftop, every forge, every reused shard of pottery was already a shrine to real life. Philistine children grew up not knowing their founding patriarch, but they knew how to throw a spear, read the wind, wrap onion bread, and divide fish fairly. 5 cities, no throne. A civilization with no legend, only legacy. They didn't need a king to name, because every citizen was already a carved line in that quiet history. They came by boat. They came with the tips of spears, curved swords, and memories of fallen civilizations. But to survive, they had to lay down their weapons, pick up hoes, and learn how to farm the coastal plains. The Philistines, or more accurately, the Peliset, couldn't live alone in the shattered remains of Canaan. They were sea people, but they were now on land. And on that land, others had been there long before. The Canaanites didn't vanish, they only changed form. After war, invasions and chaos following the Bronze Age collapse, 12th century before the Common Era, many native Canaanite communities still existed, scattered. Some were farmers in small villages. Some were survivors from old city-states, no longer with kings or walls, but still with seeds and hearth fires. The Philistines didn't arrive in an empty land. They arrived in a land recovering quietly, and they had to learn how to survive there, through negotiation, through marriage, through cohabitation. Archaeological evidence shows that from the earliest days, Canaanite communities lived alongside Philistine settlements. Canaanite pottery sat beside Aegean pottery, and not just side by side, but increasingly blended. Many shards had Mycenaean shapes, but used Levantine clay. Some Aegean-style bowls were engraved with wheat motifs, something never seen on Crete, but common on Canaanite plains. There were even water jars with sea-like petal-flared rims, but fired using enclosed kilns in Semitic fashion. From kitchens to tableware, every object bore witness to a silent cohabitation of two worlds. Traditional clay stoves sat next to new Greek-style ovens. Traces of food, tools, even tattoo patterns, all showed a new community born from two surviving cultures. Not assimilation, not domination, but integration, in poverty, in necessity, and in shared broken memory. Women, as often in history, were the key architects of that connection. Many Canaanite women married Peliset warriors, creating not just new families, but living conduits of cultural transfer. They taught their husbands how to store seeds, how to make pomegranate vinegar, how to weave mildew-resistant reed baskets. They told old stories by the fire, lulled children in the Canaanite tongue, and passed down domestic worship traditions. It may have been them, the unnamed in stone inscriptions, who wove Philistine identity through hearth and voice. One reason this fusion happened so quickly may lie in recent history. The Canaanites were already familiar with Aegean peoples through trade that stretched over the previous century. They had traded with Mycenaean merchants, heard strange sea languages, sipped Greek wine from clay cups. So when the Peliset came, many Canaanites already understood, were familiar, and maybe even spoke their language. The language they shared, if any, is now lost. We haven't found clear Philistine writing, but it may have been a Semitic Creole, or a phonetic evolution of an island dialect, or perhaps they simply adopted Canaanite speech to survive. That language didn't need to be standardized. It lived in the hands of vendors, in a mother's cry, on clay walls carved with simple marks. A living voice, with no grammar, just the need to be understood. And perhaps there were children of both bloodlines, born among ashes, raised with sea winds and earthbound lullabies. And what of the gods? The Philistines didn't bring Zeus. They didn't worship Poseidon. They built no Greek-style temples, left no sea religion symbols. Instead, they worshipped Dagon, a local Canaanite deity, half man, half fish, symbol of grain and harvest. Not because they forgot their roots, but perhaps because they believed the gods remained in the old lands, and now they had to learn how to live with the gods of this one. Religious change, if it happened, didn't come through preaching, but through grief for a lost homeland and the need for shelter in a new one. Not a merger, but a shared rebuilding of the hearth. Not enemies, but neighbors on the edge of history. Philistia wasn't founded, it was woven by two lost hands meeting in the wreckage. No declaration, no coronation. No king rising to power with brass trumpets. But around 1100 before the Common Era, Philistia had become an underground economic power, controlling the vital trade route between Egypt and the Near East. From the land reborn after the Great Collapse, the 5 Philistine city-states rose not by armies, but through goods, taxes, and olive oil. On land, the transit hubs where travelers stopped. Philistia sat at the final stop of the bustling caravan route from Anatolia and the Levant to Egypt. At these transit stations, the Philistines didn't need great city gates or written laws. They set up an unofficial taxation system where every caravan had to stop, declare goods, exchange wares, or pay in kind. No written rules, just tacit agreement and guards who recognized regular travelers. Prices were stable. Exchange rates stayed consistent. Trust came from repetition, not decrees. Here, they collected taxes, exchanged goods, provided fresh water, pomegranate wine, coarse textiles, and sold essential fuel, olive oil, baked bread, sea salt. Ekron, once a small village, now had over 115 industrial-scale olive presses, an archaeologically unprecedented number in the ancient Levant of the 11th century before the Common Era. Archaeologists have found traces of press facilities, pulp drainage channels, drying yards, and storage vats, indicating not just self-sufficient production, but a well-organized, export-oriented industry. The scent of fire-cured olives filled the air, not the smell of a meal, but the scent of the treasury. It clung to hair, clothing, and even hand-inscribed tax records. On the sea, cross-ocean trade. Ashkelon, became the largest natural harbour on the southern coast of Canaan. From there, the Philistines traded directly with Cyprus, Crete, and even North Africa. Aegean pottery, Anatolian copper, tin from the British Isles, loaded onto ships alongside wine, textiles, and Canaanite craftwork. No Philistine archives name this system, but archaeologists call it the earliest economy outside empire control. A silent empire, sustained by movement, not declarations. The Philistines didn't expand by war, at least during the early phase, but they were far from invisible on the military map. Philistia's economic stability relied heavily on controlling the security of trade routes. They had chariots, the ultimate weapon on the plains, and mercenary troops experienced in small unit tactics. They did not conquer territory, but they secured roads, protected toll stations, and quelled unrest if travelers didn't comply. The Philistines didn't declare war, but anyone traveling from Egypt to Anatolia had to pass through land watched by chariots hidden in wheat fields. They lived like station coordinators, letting goods pass as long as travelers shared the spoils. They didn't write history, but every olive jar, every traveler's station was a silent document of their influence. No throne, but scales. No codified law, but stable prices. Philistia didn't proclaim an empire, but every traveler had to stop there. Philistia was never an empire, but throughout the 11th century before the Common Era, they became the political and military nightmare of early Israel. While the Hebrew tribes were still scattered villages using bronze axes and stone swords, the Philistines were wearing iron armor, operating chariots, and most importantly, controlling the blacksmiths. Iron, the symbol of new power. According to the book of Samuel, the Israelites had no blacksmiths in all the land. All tools had to be taken into Philistine territory to be forged or sharpened. Not only were there no workshops, the Israelites lacked the heat technology needed to smelt iron, a metal that required intense fire and refined charcoal. From around 1100 to 1020 before the Common Era, the entire region of Judea depended on Philistine smiths for plough blades, spearheads, or even goat butchering knives. This monopoly was not just a weapon. It was an economic noose around the neck of a forming nation. It wasn't just weaponry. It was a monopoly on the technology of war. Iron remade nations. Iron decided who ruled and who obeyed. And for nearly a generation, iron spoke Philistine. War not declared, but unavoidable. The Philistines didn't declare war. They pressured borders through trade, toll stations, and by blocking harvest routes. They controlled the coastal plains, where the land was flat as a palm, ideal for chariots to move fast and kill faster. Meanwhile, the Israelites lived in the Judean hills, lands of rock slides, steep mountains, where no wheel could turn during the rainy season. This difference in terrain dictated more than transportation. It determined who controlled harvests, taxes, and commerce. According to the book of Samuel, they once set up posts in Israelite territory, collecting harvests without conquest. They didn't need to plant flags, because Israelites had to buy their sickles back with bronze. David, the traitor who lived in Gath. A bitter irony. Before becoming king of Israel, David, the slayer of Goliath, once lived as a mercenary for the Philistines. He lived in Gath. He was trusted by the Philistine king. At one point, David even brought 600 soldiers to live in Philistia, among the enemy. There, David learned to fight with iron and to rule with economy. David didn't just survive in enemy territory. He observed how the Philistines organized armies, taxed citizens, managed chariots, and maintained control without empire. In Gath, he saw a model of decentralized but effective leadership, where each lord held a role, and unity emerged only through shared purpose. It's no coincidence that when he became king, David didn't build an Egyptian-style empire. He built a league of armed tribes, using religious symbols to reinforce royal authority. The Philistines had no idea, but they taught David how to build a state by not becoming an empire. Religion, neither Canaanite nor Israelite. The Philistines left no written myths, but they did not worship Yahweh, nor the mountain gods of Canaan. They worshipped Dagon, a half-man, half-fish deity, possibly representing both the sea and grain, a symbol of a people sustained by both fishing and farming. The temple of Dagon was built low, with no high steps, no sacred peaks like Israelite temples. They didn't ascend. They worshipped on ground level, where seeds sprout and fish lay eggs. Even the Ark of the Covenant was once captured by the Philistines and brought to the temple of Dagon, according to the book of Samuel. That event wasn't just a military win. It was an effort to seize the sacred symbol, to make Israel's soul dwell in a Philistine temple. They worshipped Dagon, the half-man, half-fish god. They built low temples, no towering altars. Even the Ark of the Covenant was captured and placed in Dagon's temple, as the book of Samuel says. Though they didn't keep it long, the event showed. They didn't want to destroy Israel. They wanted to control its sacred meaning. No declaration of war, but pressure to live. No city destroyed, but smiths taken. No invasion by army, but conquest by blacksmith and sacred ark. Philistines didn't become kings, but taught kings how to wear armor. Stone from the rebel, iron from the roadkeeper. Two civilizations speaking in materials. The Philistines did not die in a great war. They were not swallowed by a bloodthirsty empire. They dissolved like mist, fading from history like a shadow no one remembered to name. From trade heights to strategic loss. In the early 10th century before the Common Era, Philistia was still the final stop on the eastern Mediterranean trade route. But then they lost the port of Joppa. A small geographic shift, but a fatal economic blow. Joppa, one of the rare natural harbors deep enough for large ships, fell into the hands of northern Canaanites who had allied with the rising Hebrew kingdoms. This event, occurring around the early 10th century before the Common Era, marked the rerouting of regional trade. From then on, merchant caravans from the Aegean and Egypt no longer needed to stop at Gaza or Ashkelon. They could dock at the new port in Joppa and head straight into the northern hills, bypassing Philistia entirely. Philistia still had goods, but no one stopped to buy them. No royal family, so no voice. The Philistines had no dynasty. They had a pentapolis, a 5-city alliance that worked well during stability, but lacked a collective voice during crisis. No shared heir, no capital, no spokesperson. As each city-state weakened, no one stood up to say, "We are dying." No chronicles, no legends passed down, no monuments of remembrance. When Gath was destroyed in the early 9th century before the Common Era, it vanished from the political map with no one to rebuild it. They didn't collapse like an empire. They were worn away like a roadside no one sweeps, parasites on someone else's map. When the Assyrian Empire entered Philistia, they didn't need to conquer, just to install governors. The Philistines became vassals. Then when Assyria weakened, Egypt returned and pillaged. Then came Babylon, then the Phoenicians, then the Greeks, then Rome. each new power erased another layer of the Philistine name, until finally, after the failed Jewish uprising under Hadrian in the year 135 of the Common Era, the Romans renamed the province of Judea as Syria Palestina, as a way to erase Jewish identity and mock an ancient enemy, the Philistines. They didn't choose the name of a new empire. They chose the name of a vanished people, as if to say, this land no longer belongs to anyone worthy of naming it. The name Philistine lived on, not as a people, but as an empty label, not killed, but forgotten. The Philistines once taught the Israelites how to forge iron, once grew rich on trade roads, once lived between sea and soil, but left no words behind, no script, no myth, no anthem. All that remains are pots decorated with Aegean patterns, pig bones, from a species the Israelites would not eat, and broken stone foundations beneath dry earth. No inscriptions, no library, no temple to mark their sacred center. Archaeologists have not even fully deciphered the Philistine language, if it ever existed in a defined form. They exist in objects, but are absent in stories. Their name is repeated, not to remember, but to mislabel a land that no longer belongs to them. No funeral, no mourning. No one carved a gravestone or named the final ruler. No living soul wrote the biography of the dead. The Philistines died the way they lived, silent, without fanfare. They once lived, once fought, once taught others how to forge iron. But by the 1st century of the Common Era, the Philistines no longer appeared on the population map. Only the name, Palestine, drifted through dynasties like a smudge from a civilization no one remembered the face of, a name chosen for retaliation. In the year 135 of the Common Era, after crushing the Jewish uprising, Emperor Hadrian renamed the province of Judea, Syria, Palestina. They didn't choose the name of an ally. They chose the name of Israel's most ancient enemy, the Philistines. That act wasn't just geographical manipulation. It was manipulation of memory. The Philistines, already gone for hundreds of years, were now summoned, not because they deserved it, but because they were used as a symbol, from symbol to map. The name Palestine persisted across layers of empire, not as an independent nation, but as a recurring administrative label. The Byzantine Empire divided the region into Palestina Prima and Palestina Secunda, preserving the Roman name as if prolonging the memory. During the Islamic period, the name continued appearing in geographic texts by Arab scholars like al-Muqaddasi in the 10th century. Under the Ottomans, the area belonged to the Sanjak of Jerusalem, but the West still referred to it as Palestine, a linguistic habit needing no one's approval. After World War I, the British established the Palestine Mandate, keeping the name, though no one knew who the Philistines really were. No one ever truly restored Philistine civilization, but their name never disappeared from the map. They are history's strangest example, a people vanished from reality, but forever present in how others name the place they once lived. No descendants, but a ghost. There is no community that claims to be descendants of the Philistines. No identity passed down, no living tongue. No ancient texts, no epics, no recorded folk tales in any script, no temples, no festivals, no days of remembrance, and no one went looking for them. Until, in the year 2019, an international archaeological team published DNA results from remains found in Ashkelon. The DNA showed some of the earliest Philistines had ancestry from the Aegean region, confirming the theory that they were one of the sea peoples who migrated. However, those genetic traits disappeared within just a few generations, showing how thoroughly the Philistines intermarried with locals, becoming indistinguishable. They left behind genes, but not myth. The name Philistine survives only in biblical literature, as a fairy tale enemy. The word Philistine in modern English even means a crude person, lacking appreciation for art. That meaning began in 17th century Germany, when university scholars in Jena used Philister to label uneducated townspeople, the opposite of the intellectual elite. Later, the word crossed into English and became a way to insult anyone seen as materialistic, vulgar, or culturally ignorant. A civilization that once mastered the plains and ironwork, now reduced to a derogatory adjective in the Oxford Dictionary. They were turned into an insult, a negative label, a memory with no one to defend it. A people who lived between the sea and the fields, who once stationed chariots beside barley fields, who once threatened Israelite kings with iron and taxes, but ended with a name borrowed by others. If the Israelites have Jerusalem, if the Egyptians have the pyramids, then the Philistines have a word in the Oxford Dictionary used to describe the uncultured. No language remains, no descendants, no oral stories passed down. But still, there are traces. Round houses of packed earth in Ashdod, massive olive presses in Ekron, hand-painted pottery in the Aegean style, but made of Canaanite clay. The earth does not speak, but it remembers. Archaeologists keep digging, gently, as if searching for a dream that has faded. Philistines and the unspoken voice. No inscriptions, no alphabet of their own, no scriptures, but there are artifacts, a silent language, Philistine pottery decorated with sea waves and spirals, influenced by Mycenaean style, but made with Canaanite clay, daggers, arrowheads, and iron axes, evidence that they were among the first people in the region to use iron. Homes with unplastered mud walls, low doorways, and rounded roofs, a distinct architectural style, unlike the Canaanites. The letters are gone, but the objects still tell stories. Only architecture, tools, food, the things people leave behind without knowing they're speaking. Trash pits filled with pig bones, a meat forbidden to the Jews and other highland peoples, yet common in Philistine kitchen waste. This may not have been just dietary habit, but a quiet declaration. We are not like you. Hearths placed at the center of the house, an Aegean trait, where families gathered around the fire, unlike the Canaanite corner kitchen model. Graves with burial styles found nowhere else in the region. They did not write about themselves, but they imprinted themselves on every brick, every blade, every heap of ashes. Silence, as choice or fate. In the same land, the Phoenicians left alphabets. The Israelites wrote epics and laws. The Egyptians carved the names of pharaohs into stone and pyramids. Philistines left no inscriptions, no grand temples, no proclamations. They exist as a blank space in text, but a clear imprint on the soil. Maybe they had no need to write. Maybe they didn't get the chance. Maybe they learned Canaanite script and left nothing of their own. Maybe they simply didn't think they would be forgotten. History writes about those with letters, with kings, with victories. Philistines left no kings, no declarations, but the earth kept them, not because they were powerful, but because they once lived, once ate, once died, once forged iron beside barley fields. Every shard of pottery is a whisper that someone once was here, that they were not immortal, but they were real. No tombstones, no maps, no inscriptions, no epics, no legends, no one to retell. But the earth remembers, the ashes preserve, the hearth still speak. The Philistines do not raise their voice, but they leave whispers beneath the fingernails of those who dig. History may not write their name, but the earth has never forgotten. But the earth remembers, the ashes preserve, the hearth still speak. The Philistines do not raise their voice, but they leave whispers beneath the fingernails of those who dig. No one remembers who they were, but everyone still uses their name. Philistine, a word that has survived 3 millennia, but not as a badge of honor, from a people to a label. In the 17th century, at the University of Jena in Germany, scholars used the word Philister to refer to uneducated locals, in contrast to the intellectual elite. Later, the term entered English as an insult for anyone considered practical, vulgar, and incapable of appreciating art. He's such a Philistine, not because he's from Gaza, but because he hates Mozart. History reversed, greatness turned crude. A people who mastered iron before the Israelites, who once defeated Hebrew tribes and made them vassals, who built a whole autonomous pentapolis system in the chaos after the Bronze Age. And now, what remains is an adjective used to offend. Philistines left no declarations. No one wrote their history, so others wrote it for them and wrote it wrong. And so they became immortal in the worst way, not for victory, not for culture, but for a rudeness projected onto them. Philistines, from a real people to a symbol of someone who knows nothing about art. They lost in war and in memory, but their name is immortal in a bitter circle. No monument, no shared memory, but their name is spoken every time someone mocks the uncultured. Philistines, living on as a punchline. Alright. Cyrus the Great, the greatest king of Persia. At the beginning of the 6th century before the Common Era, the map of power in the Near East was in a state of fragile stability, the kind of balance that resembles a frozen lake in late winter. Between deserts and rivers, 3 major powers shared control over most of the literate world, each representing a distinct form of ancient authority. The Median Empire ruled the Iranian plateau, governing through Aryan bloodlines and noble marriage alliances. This was the origin of a power rooted in lineage, where dynasties continued not through conquest, but through arranged unions. The Kingdom of Lydia, located in Western Asia Minor, was so wealthy that people used King Croesus's name as a synonym for unimaginable riches. It was the first kingdom in history to mint gold coins, around 600 years before the Common Era, transforming wealth into a tool of influence via trade. The Neo-Babylonian Empire, at the lower reaches of the Euphrates, served as the religious and cultural heart of Mesopotamia. Magnificent temples like Esagila and marvels like the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, made it the seat of divine power, where kings ruled not just by law, but as representatives of the god Marduk. From the outside, this order appeared strong, but beneath it, it was like a web of frayed ropes, waiting for a single tug to snap. Meanwhile, in the southern part of the Iranian plateau, there was a small land called Anshan, a vassal of Media. Hardly anyone paid attention to it. No famous walls, no golden temples, no kings powerful enough to shake the pages of history. Yet this was where fate quietly planted a seed. Anshan belonged to the ancient region of Persis, a place with a harsher climate than any capital city. Historically, This area had been part of the ancient kingdom of Elam, a brilliant civilization that had existed since the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, but had since declined. The Persians, newly settled Aryan descendants, inherited the remnants of Elam, but mostly lived as semi-nomadic people, adapted to rocky terrain and poor soil. They survived on marginal farming, herding livestock, and endured more than they ruled. Every winter, they piled stones on their roofs to keep out the wind, and in the summer, they drank from wells dug over 10 meters deep. This was a place where people learned to brace against the wind before learning to bow to any king. Barren land, dry air, and mountain silence all taught them one thing: patience could be a form of power. The nobility here traced their lineage to the Achaemenid dynasty, founded by Achaemenes in the late 8th century before the Common Era, but were still seen as country folk in the eyes of Babylonian and Median elites. They had no grand palaces, no processions of hundreds, only hot blood, strange speech, and an unwavering faith in Ahura Mazda, the god of light in the early Persian religion. The Persians had no empire, only memory, and in that memory, their ancestor, a man named Achaemenes, had once ruled a tiny city-state, living among arid valleys, speaking a language incomprehensible to the West, and worshipping gods the rest of the world had never heard of. But it was in that parched land, around 600 years before the Common Era, that a child was born. He was the product of a strategic marriage. His father was Cambyses I, king of Anshan, from the Achaemenid line. His mother was Mandane, a Median princess, daughter of King Astyages. Two bloodlines, the ruled and the ruler, converged in one small human being, whom no one suspected would one day shake the thrones of an entire region. His name was Cyrus, or COURTROOM in Old Persian, meaning sun. The Persians did not choose this name by accident. They believed the sun symbolized life, order, and justice, things long eclipsed by the shadow of war and division in this land. And as destiny had it, that sun would shine across a world still trapped in the twilight of tired empires. History has moments that seem unimportant. A name given, a child born, a land overlooked. But it is precisely at the crossroads of dismissal that true empires begin. The 6th century before the Common Era Near East had no idea it was standing on a fault line. It could not have imagined that within just a few decades, the entire power structure that had ruled for millennia would vanish, undone by a man from the desert who carried no vengeance, only a new code of law. Not long after Cyrus was born in the arid land of Anshan, a dream came to King Astyages, the supreme ruler of the Median Empire. In the dream, he saw water gushing from his daughter Mandane's womb, rising like a flash flood, submerging the entire kingdom. An uneasy dream, a sign, though vague, enough to jolt him awake in the middle of the night. Astyages, at that time, around 580 before the Common Era, was the last king of the Median Empire. He succeeded Cyaxares, who had once allied with Babylon to defeat Assyria, a feat that turned Media into the center of continental power. The pressure of succession was no small matter. Kingship to him was not just a throne, but a vow to preserve a fragile order barely rebuilt after a century of chaos. He was not a tyrant, not a bloodthirsty ruler like the Western despots to come, but he believed in omens, and he understood. In a land where even the stars could change positions, a child, if foretold, could undo the balance of everything. Dreamers often keep quiet, but kings who dream summon councils, royal magi elderly astrologers and scholars from lofty towers were called in. They did not hesitate. The child in the princess's womb will bring disaster. It is not a grandchild, but a wave that will sweep away your majesty's throne. Astyages was stunned. He was a king, not a killer. But he was also a father. And the empire he was building, he believed, was the only legacy he could leave behind. So he chose a middle path. Marry Mandain to a weak king, Cambyses I of Anshan. A man, in his eyes, too small to father a strong successor. A marriage arranged out of confusion and calculation, not affection. But the dreams did not stop. A second time, Astyages dreamed of vines growing from Mandain's belly, spreading across the entire plateau. The vines crawled up fortress walls, stretched into the plains, and wrapped around the crown he wore. This time, the council did not waver. The grandchild soon to be born will not only topple the throne, it will take root in the heart of the kingdom and turn everything into its own. Astyages had no choice left. He ordered. When the child was born, it must be killed immediately. The order was given to Harpagus, the most loyal general who had defended the throne through many campaigns, a man who understood the law and understood the importance of loyalty. Harpagus was not just a general. He was a symbol of the Median court's middle nobility, those tasked with maintaining order while always standing near the line of betrayal. Around 576, before the Common Era, he received the command that he himself could not know would one day reshape the entire regional power map. Harpagus accepted the order, but when faced with the newborn crying in the midwife's arms, his heart wavered. To kill a child, to kill a mother's dream, to kill a future because of a dream? No. Harpagus bent the law. He gave the child to a herdsman named Mithridates, living in the distant southern mountains. Coincidentally, or perhaps by fate, Mithridates' wife had just lost a child. They gave Cyrus a humble new name, hiding his royal blood. The boy grew up among livestock, in a low-roofed wooden house at the foot of the mountains, beside the howling wind and the smell of burnt sheep fat from the kitchen smoke. On winter nights, his foster mother wrapped him in a thick patchwork blanket and placed him to sleep among the goats for warmth. No one in that house knew that the curled-up child would one day have tens of thousands of guards, 4 capitals, and an entire people chanting his name in legend. They only knew he ate well, cried loudly, and often looked toward the sunrise. King Astyages suspected nothing. Harpagus sent word. It's done. The child, according to all records, had vanished. No one knew that in the valleys of a Persian countryside, the wave once foretold by a dream was still rising, day by day. No one guessed that the man who once dodged a killing order and the one who nursed a stranger's child would one day become the 2 hands helping to forge the greatest empire the world had ever known. 10 years passed. The child the Median Empire tried to kill in the womb had now grown into a strong boy, bright-eyed and broad-foreheaded, living among livestock and stones. Cyrus didn't know who he was. He only knew he was the son of a herdsman, the man who taught him how to build fences, lead goats, and read the sky for rain. But inside him, there was something that didn't belong to the mountains. Cyrus gave orders more than he asked for permission. He settled disputes between village children like a magistrate, and when they played games, he never chose to be a warrior or a hunter. He always chose to be king. It's told that one day, Cyrus and the village children played a familiar game, king and court. In this game, one child played the king, the others played guards Ministers, priests, seal keepers, gatekeepers, a miniature simulation of a royal court. But Cyrus didn't play like the others. He set rules, assigned roles, determined punishments for disobedience. He didn't pretend to be a king. He ruled like one. And strangely, the other kids obeyed. This time Cyrus was king. He commanded as if it were real, issued laws, enforced punishments, proclaimed decrees, gave out rewards. A noble child, the son of a local official, refused to obey. He mocked Cyrus's role, dismissing it as nonsense from a peasant boy. Cyrus didn't laugh. He ordered the boy to be whipped in the middle of the court, and the other kids carried it out. The noble child returned home with welts across his back. His father, furious, immediately reported the matter to the local authorities. The news reached King Astyages. The old king was curious. A shepherd's boy had dared to punish a noble child, and had done so with the ceremony of judgment. He summoned Cyrus, along with his father, to the court of Ecbatana. During questioning, the boy showed no fear. Cyrus stood tall, spoke clearly, and didn't apologize. He explained the punishment, emphasizing, "In the game, I was the king, and that's how I ruled." Astyages sat silently. Something stirred in his memory. The voice, the stance, the way he walked, not like a farmer's child, not like an unknown boy. The way he stood, straight, unbowed, reminded the king of a blurry image from his past. Mandane's gaze when she argued with him as a girl. Or even further back, the eyes of Cyaxares, the father who had built the empire. Perhaps blood does not lie, and destiny, even if buried under rocks and dust, will rise at its time. He began to suspect. After summoning Mithridates and questioning him thoroughly about Cyrus's background, the truth broke open. The herdsman confessed everything. The boy was the king's grandson. Harpagus hadn't killed him, but entrusted him to their care. For 10 years, a cursed child had survived and grown, within the very kingdom meant to erase him. Astyages was furious. But he didn't kill Cyrus, partly because the child was his own blood, but more deeply because fear had shifted. He no longer believed he could control the future. Cyrus was allowed to return to his birth parents, Cambyses and Mandane, in Anshan. But the seed of resistance had been planted in that very moment. As for Harpagus, he would pay the price. Astyages killed Harpagus's son, chopped him into pieces, cooked him, and served him at a grand royal banquet. No threats, no declarations. Just a luxurious dinner in the palace, glowing oil lamps and the scent of meat rising from bronze pots. Harpagus, aware but silent, ate it all. He sliced each piece, chewed slowly, face expressionless. Each swallow was a memory, and an unspoken vow of revenge. Only when the final platter was served, bearing the head, hands, and feet of his own son, did he bow. "Everything your majesty has done has pleased your servant." Then he left, and began to plan his revenge, quietly, step by step. A betrayal would wait until 553 before the Common Era, when Harpagus would return, not to serve, but to help Cyrus overthrow the very throne of the king who had slaughtered his child. Some say, in the moment he saw Cyrus step through Ecbatana's gates, Harpagus realized this was not just the boy he once saved, but the final chance to balance the scale of blood. There was no pact between them, but something deeper than oaths bound them, a shared debt to a past no one was allowed to forget. In 559 before the Common Era, King Cambyses I passed away. Cyrus, by then nearly 30, succeeded the throne of Anshan. becoming the legitimate ruler of a small territory tucked deep within the outskirts of the Median Empire. But he did not receive the crown as a ceremony. Within the first few months of his reign, around 558 before the Common Era, Cyrus fortified the northern frontier outposts, secretly dispatched envoys to mountain Persian tribes, and issued decrees restoring some ancient Achaemenid rights. He declared nothing, but every move carried the scent of someone who didn't merely want to hold land, but redraw the map. In name, he was a vassal of Astyages, but in truth, inside him, was a blood debt never forgiven. Cyrus hadn't forgotten that old game, hadn't forgotten Astyages' eyes when sparing his life, an expression not of love, but of fear. He hadn't forgotten that interrogation when he first realized the blood in his veins wasn't just of shepherds, but of kings. And somewhere, someone else hadn't forgotten either. Harpagus, the aging general, still served in the Median court as though he'd never tasted his own son. He still obeyed, still wore his armor, still played the part. But deep within him stirred a silent thunder. They needed no treaty. The look from their last meeting was enough for two men to understand. It was time the empire paid its due. In 553 before the Common Era, Cyrus publicly declared independence from Media. Astyages, now frail, sent Harpagus to command the Median army to quell the uprising. Not because he trusted him completely, but because he thought that man had been broken at the blood feast 10 years ago. He did not suspect that trust, or rather, that laziness of suspicion, would be the very spear to stab back at his throne. He did not suspect this was his final move on the board. On the march, Harpagus ordered a camp halt, then told the soldiers the truth. The man you serve sacrificed my child. The man you're about to fight is the one destined to change the fate of this land. No more words were needed. Most of the soldiers, already resentful over Astyages' tax and control policies, turned their spears to Cyrus. The civil war lasted 3 years, from 553 to 550 before the Common Era. During that time, Cyrus avoided direct confrontation. He ordered ambushes in the forests and mountains, raided supply lines, cut off communications, then retreated to rugged terrain unfamiliar to the Medes. The battles weren't fought on plains, but on hillsides, in morning mist, through stone passes only locals knew. Cyrus, with an army half the size, launched counterattacks from the Persian highlands, where he had grown up in poverty on rocks and goat's milk. In 550 before the Common Era, the capital Ecbatana fell. Astyages was captured alive and, in a cruel joke of fate, was spared by the very grandson he once ordered to die. No execution, no blood in the square. Just an old man collapsing, and an empire falling with no one to scream. The Median Empire, once rival to Babylon and Lydia, was erased. Cyrus did not rename the land. He didn't start from scratch. He absorbed the entire old structure, from law to administration, then merged it with Anshan to form the first Achaemenid Empire, also known as the Persian Empire. He did not take the throne as a usurper. He took it as a rightful heir, by blood and by destiny. From a child buried in memory, Cyrus stepped into the light, and the first person who helped him rise to the steps of power was a father who had once lost his son to a blind command. Lydia, to the west of the newly formed empire, was a kingdom unaccustomed to letting rising neighbors thrive. King Croesus, the richest man in the world at the time, did not believe in the stability of someone who had once risen by rebellion. He sought out the Oracle of Delphi, the most sacred site in Greece, where kings, generals, and sometimes the lost came to seek the voice of Apollo, but truly only heard what they already hoped to believe. Croesus, no exception, asked a familiar question: "If I attack this man, what will happen?" And the oracle answered in that famously ambiguous tone Greek mythology adored: "If the king marches forth, a great empire will be destroyed." Croesus returned beaming and prepared for war. In 547 before the Common Era, the Lydian army advanced into Cappadocia, a Persian borderland. Cyrus moved to intercept at the Battle of Tyria in the spring of 547 before the Common Era, across a dry, windswept plain in Cappadocia. The Lydians, well-equipped and battle-hardened, unleashed wave after wave of powerful cavalry. The Persians, resilient, held formation, adapted to terrain, and constantly shifted strategy. The battle dragged from noon to sunset, blood thinned with dust. Both sides suffered heavy losses. No victor, no retreat. But in both kings' minds, they knew, next time, there would be no draw. Croesus withdrew to Sardis, his capital, convinced that winter would stall Cyrus's advance. He sent envoys for reinforcements from Sparta, Babylon, and Egypt. But winter also delayed allies, wary of cold, supply lines, and inner unrest. Croesus still believed that, with gold in his treasury, gods in his temples, and a prophecy in hand, he had time. He did not know. Cyrus believed in timing, not in convenience. And Cyrus, he didn't wait for spring. He launched his march in December, something no one had done before. As he neared Sardis, Cyrus faced a problem. Lydian cavalry was too strong, but Harpagus, the man who once ate his own son, now chief strategist, had been observing and found a weakness. Their horses fear unfamiliar scents. Cyrus surrounded his archers with camels, creatures strange in smell and shape to the Lydian war horses. The result, chaos. The Lydian cavalry broke rank. Their lines collapsed. After just 14 days of siege, Sardis fell. Croesus, the one who once believed in gods, ruled over gold, instruments, and all of Asia Minor, became a prisoner. It said Croesus was bound to a pyre, prepared to be burned alive. He cried out Solon's name, the Athenian sage he once mocked, because Solon had said, "Only at the end of life can one judge true happiness." Cyrus, curious, asked. Croesus told the story, not as a man facing death, but as one who was once young, proud, and thought himself invincible. He spoke of Solon, of lessons forgotten amid the sound of gold falling and horses neighing in Sardis's palaces. Cyrus listened without interruption. And he spared his life, not out of pity, but because he knew the man speaking was no longer an enemy, but a living book. From a man who came for a prophecy, Croesus became an advisor in the Persian court. He, once a king, now taught Cyrus to understand the mind of the conquered, the value of restraint, and the cost of overconfidence. An empire fell not because it lost a battle, but because it misread the will of the gods, and another empire, just born from the womb of the old, learned to survive from the very man who once sought to devour it. Babylon, the jewel of the East, the heart of Mesopotamia, a city with walls 10 times taller than a man, moats as deep as rivers, and golden gates adorned with lions. Anyone who passed by thought, "This city cannot fall." And because they believed that, it made them unprepared for the opposite. In 540 before the Common Era, after conquering Elam and capturing Susa, Cyrus moved his army southward. His opponent was Nabonidus, the strange king of Babylon, who had abandoned the capital to live in seclusion near Tamar in the desert for nearly a decade, stirring public discontent. During his absence, the Temple of Marduk, the religious and political center of Babylon, was left without a king to perform rites. Major ceremonies were suspended. The people whispered, the god had turned away, the king had left. Babylon still had high walls, but the hearts of its people had fallen. The official religion of Babylon worshipped the god Marduk, but Nabonidus favored the moon god Sin, seen by many priests as heretical. To the priests of Marduk, Cyrus was no longer an invader, but a liberator. In 539 before the Common Era, Cyrus gathered his forces near Opis, a strategic city north of Babylon. There, he crushed the Babylonian army in a single battle, opening the way to the capital. But he did not conduct a siege like other kings. He did not climb walls, launch projectiles, or hurl hooks. He waited for the water to drop. The city of Babylon was surrounded by the Euphrates River. The river flowed through the heart of the city, supplying water and serving as a natural defense. Cyrus ordered a canal to be dug, diverting the Euphrates into nearby plains. On a night in October, while citizens celebrated a religious festival, one of the holiest of the year, lasting days with wine, music, and loosened gates, the water level dropped. Weeks earlier, Cyrus had secretly diverted the Euphrates southward, aided quietly by Elamite engineers and local workers. Every inch of earth was moved by night, every wooden stake driven deep into mud. No one expected the river, meant for boats, to open gates. And the Persian army, barefoot, dressed in dark wool, waded through the shallow riverbed, entering through the water gate beneath the walls. No drums, no shouts, no siege ladders. Babylon fell without a fight. Nabonidus was captured alive. There was no public execution, no burning, no looting. In a clay tablet known as the Nabonidus Chronicle, the priests of Marduk wrote, Cyrus was chosen by Marduk, guided into the city, opened the hearts of the people, and restored order. As for Cyrus, in the famous Cyrus cylinder inscription, he recorded, I ordered the restoration of temples, allowed all peoples to return to their homelands, and honored their freedom of worship. With this act, he became the first in ancient history to be praised as a humane king. The Jews, then exiled in Babylon for over 50 years since Nebuchadnezzar's conquest, were allowed to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. They saw him not only as a benefactor, but as one sent by the Lord. In the book of Isaiah, the prophet called him the Messiah of God, a title never before given to a foreigner. In chapter 45, it is written, I call you by name, though you do not know me. Cyrus did not destroy Babylon. He absorbed it. Language, architecture, law, administration, all were preserved. He did not bring a new empire. He created a new order in which the conquered felt, not erased. He conquered with a river and ruled with trust. No war horses at the gates, no battering rams, only footsteps in mud, and a vision taller than 10 brick walls. October 539 before the Common Era. Babylon had just fallen, and while other empires were still debating whether to smash statues, Cyrus had his craftsmen mold clay, not to glorify himself, but to carve a vision. A small clay cylinder, less than 23 centimeters long, curved like a human wrist, was buried beneath the foundation of the Esagila temple, the main temple of the god Marduk in Babylon. According to many scholars, the Marduk priesthood may have helped draft this text, or at least approved its content, as a way to reassert the temple's position after being neglected under King Nabonidus. The Cyrus cylinder, therefore, was not just the declaration of a king, but a mutual understanding between a new ruler and the old religious elite. On it, lines in ancient Akkadian were carefully inscribed, no exclamation marks, but each sentence was a proclamation. This is what posterity calls the Cyrus cylinder. Unlike royal inscriptions of its time, filled with praise of conquest and threats of punishment, the Cyrus cylinder did not demand submission, did not boast about severed heads, nor list burned cities. While Hammurabi's stele recorded harsh laws and penalties, and Assyrian stele bragged about victories through images of massacres and looting, the Cyrus cylinder quietly spoke of return, of forgiveness, and of the right to be oneself. The cylinder did not tell of bloody triumphs. It named no enemies. It listed no war horses, no troop counts, no grandiose figures. Instead, Cyrus declared, "I am Cyrus, king of the world, great king, legitimate king, chosen by Marduk. I did not enter Babylon as a conqueror. I made the people of the city rejoice to welcome me, and I kept peace. And then, I allowed all exiled peoples to return to their homelands. I restored their temples. I returned their gods to their native cities." No ruler in history before had openly acknowledged the right to religious freedom, freedom of movement, and the right to cultural restoration for conquered peoples, not because they hadn't thought of it, but because they didn't need to. They conquered, they crushed. Cyrus conquered, he liberated. That clay cylinder was not just an administrative record, it was a promise, a charter that never called itself a charter, but which contained, perhaps for the first time in human history, a declaration of human rights in the classical sense: the right to exist, the right to worship one's God, the right to return home, and the right not to be treated as a defeated enemy simply for having lost. 2,000 years later, when the Cyrus cylinder was unearthed in 1879 by archaeologist Hormuzd Rassam, no one suspected that this ancient Akkadian text would become a modern symbol. In 1971, the United Nations displayed a replica of the cylinder at its headquarters in New York, viewing it as a historical foundation of international humanitarian thought. Many politicians, scholars, even religious and human rights leaders have hailed Cyrus as the father of human rights. This image did not come solely from the clay text itself, but also from other sources. Books of the Old Testament like Isaiah, Ezra, and Daniel, where Cyrus is praised as the anointed of the Lord. It was the Jewish community exiled in Babylon who preserved this memory across generations, passing it on through prayers, through scripture, making Cyrus a symbol not only of tolerance, but of hope. Cyrus did not merely take Babylon. He redefined what it meant to rule, not as the owner of gods, but as one trusted by them, not as a tyrant with a whip, but as a memory keeper, a bearer of hope, a name burned into clay and buried in the ground, so that one day, if there was one, someone might dig it up and know that there was once a man who won without humiliating the defeated, a man who called himself King of the Four Corners, but knew that true greatness was to be remembered as the one who brought freedom. If ancient empires were often born by sword and blood, then Cyrus began his with a question: how do you make the defeated not want to rebel? And from that, he built an empire, not through blood, but through governance. After the victory at Babylon, the Achaemenid Empire stretched from Asia Minor to the banks of the Indus River, the largest empire in the world at that time, covering dozens of ethnicities, languages, and religions. Cyrus understood that no one could rule such a vast land by turning everyone into copies of himself. Unlike Assyria, a brutal empire known for mass deportations, temple destruction, and forcing their own gods upon the conquered, or Babylon, with its priestly hierarchy and rigid rituals, Cyrus took an unexpected path, the path of political tolerance. Not to erase identities, but to accommodate them. He chose a different way, the way of controlled pluralism. First, he kept local governments intact. In Media, Elam, Lydia, even Babylon, the native aristocracies were retained as satraps, governors, responsible for tax collection, security, and internal affairs. Each satrapy was a mini-empire with its own treasury and army, but forbidden to wage war or mint its own currency. To keep them in check, Cyrus established a secret inspector system called the Eyes and Ears of the King, envoys who traveled discreetly across the provinces, recording and reporting directly to the royal court. It was a model balance between trust and surveillance, not dismantling local power, but ensuring the center stayed sharp-eyed. For communication, Cyrus built a royal postal network, horses running day and night from the capital to the outer borders. Along routes stretching hundreds of miles, he built relay stations with fresh horses and night-watch couriers. This was the precursor to the Royal Road, a key infrastructure later expanded by Darius, but its foundation was laid by Cyrus from the early days of empire building. An ancient internet of hooves, where commands traveled faster than rumors. Second, Cyrus understood, religion is the spine of every region. Instead of imposing Persian beliefs, he restored the Temple of Marduk in Babylon, honored the gods of Elam, and allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem. In Egypt, his descendants even offered tribute at temples of Isis and Osiris, as if they were true pharaohs. He didn't need everyone to worship Ahura Mazda. He just needed them to believe. This king won't make you choose between your homeland and your faith. Third, he used guided freedom as a tool of stability, letting people pay taxes instead of forced labor, letting local laws coexist with central authority, allowing autonomy, as long as it didn't defy the empire. Many regions voluntarily joined the Achaemenid Empire, not because they loved Persia, but because they were tired of war, and Cyrus gave them breathing room. In Lydia, the former kingdom of King Croesus, Cyrus retained most native laws and customs, only adding royal observers. In Ionia, among the Greek city-states along the coast, he allowed them to keep their language, religion, and trade, so long as they didn't rebel. Many of these city-states didn't feel conquered, only that a new tax collector had arrived. So the question is, how did an empire this vast, without the internet, phones, or a centralized defense ministry, not collapse? The answer lies in a philosophy. People don't rebel because they are ruled. They rebel because they are disrespected. Cyrus didn't earn loyalty with the whip. He made subjects feel seen. And so, whether in the mountains of Media or the markets of Babylon, in the plains of Egypt or the ports of Lydia, the people paid taxes to Persia, even if they had never seen the king. He built his empire like a road, straight, firm, and wide enough for every kind of wheel, not by stacking corpses, but by understanding that diversity isn't a threat, it's the foundation for survival. Cyrus had defeated the king of Media, taken Lydia, and conquered Babylon. He tamed enemies with tolerance, used clay instead of iron to write laws. But no one is immortal. not even the one called King of the Four Corners of the World, in 530 before the Common Era. One final military campaign toward the northeastern regions of Iran, bordering Central Asia, a dry land full of rivers, steppes, and threats that had never been drawn on maps. The opponent was the Massagetae, a confederation of nomadic warrior tribes scattered beyond the Sir River. They built no cities, had no capitals, only horses, bows, and the open steppe. Each clan lived as an independent unit, only gathering when threatened. They didn't fight for land, but for the right not to be ruled. Their commander was Tomyris, a queen who had lost her husband and had one warning: "Withdraw, O king, from afar. If you do not, I will give you your fill of blood." Cyrus did not withdraw. He proposed marriage and was refused. He set an ambush, leaving behind a camp full of wine and provisions, then feigned retreat. The Massagetae, unfamiliar with strong wine, fell into the feast. Cyrus returned, slaughtered them, and captured Spargapises, the son of Tomyris. Spargapises took his own life in captivity, and from that moment, Tomyris stopped negotiating. The final battle took place weeks later, on dry sands, where no Persian god reigned. Cyrus fell in battle. There was no grand funeral, no surviving bard to sing of glory. Only Tomyris, who severed his head, dipped it into a leather bag of blood, and said, "You have thirsted for blood all your life. Now drink your fill." Herodotus told the tale as a moral lesson. According to him, Cyrus died, decapitated, and his body dishonored, a death to warn the ambitious. But Xenophon, another Greek historian, wrote that Cyrus died peacefully in bed, leaving behind a will and counsel for his son. Meanwhile, Persian traditions said little of his death, as if wishing to preserve the image of an immortal king in national memory. But embellishments aside, the truth is clear. Cyrus died as a man, not as a god. No omens, no columns of light, only desert. His body was brought back to Pasargadae, the first capital of the empire, where he had once planted trees, built gardens, and constructed his own tomb. Cyrus's tomb is not tall, not adorned with jewels. Just a block of limestone, sloped like a mountain hut, surrounded by stone columns, and a simple carved inscription: "O traveller, whoever you are and wherever you come from, I am Cyrus, who won an empire for the Persians. Do not take this earth that covers my bones." Alexander the Great, when he arrived 2 centuries later, shed tears. According to Greek historians, upon finding the tomb desecrated and its contents looted, Alexander ordered its restoration and posted guards day and night. He even sent his friend Aristobulus to oversee the repairs. It was a rare gesture, a Greek king bowing before a Persian one, not with a sword, but with reverence. A conqueror of the world bowing at the tomb of the one who had once done the same. Cyrus's death was not tragic, but it did leave a void. After him, the empire passed to Cambyses II, a man less tolerant, more suspicious. Rebellions began to stir from Egypt to Persia. A few years later, Darius I seized the throne through a bloody power struggle. Perhaps Cyrus did not only take his body with him, but the delicate balance he had maintained with his own character. Not megalomania, not divinity. It was a humble period for an extraordinary life. A man who built an empire, not with violence, but with trust. And in the end, like all men, he lay down beneath the earth. The only difference was, he once taught the world what it meant to rule without slaughter. Not everyone was mourned by Alexander the Great. Not everyone could make the greatest conqueror pause, fall into silence, and order his soldiers to rebuild every broken stone for a tomb that didn't belong to his own country. When Alexander entered Pasargadae in 330 before the Common Era, the Persian Empire was already ashes, but Cyrus's tomb still stood, solitary, made of grey limestone, without ornaments, without a crown, looted. Interior emptied, bones dug up. Only a stone slab remained, its inscription worn down by desert wind. I am Cyrus, the one who brought the Persian people their kingdom. Do not take away this earth, that covers my bones. Alexander was furious. He immediately ordered the tomb restored to its original form, placed a permanent guard. He had the bones reburied, the inscription re-engraved, and stood silently before the steps. No words were recorded from his mouth, only gestures. A Greek man before the tomb of a Persian, a fiery young king bowing his head before one who ruled with calm. There was something beyond political enmity, beyond centuries of division, beyond armies and spoils, when two emperors, never meeting in life, met in the idea of humane power. Alexander, in all his life, never rebuilt the tomb of any king. Only one. Only Cyrus. Today, Cyrus's tomb still stands in Fars province, Iran. A simple gabled structure raised on stepped stone, unlike the tombs of pharaohs or pyramids, not aimed at the stars, but toward the earth, not seeking divine immortality, but life in human memory. Though violated, buried, then uncovered, it still stands as a symbol of one idea. An empire can be ruled through trust. A king can pass and still remain in the heart of the conqueror who came after. Cyrus left no autobiography, no flamboyant monuments like the pharaohs, but he left a clay text, the Cyrus cylinder, a line carved in stone, and a small tomb. That's all. But sometimes that's enough for humanity to remember his name longer than the lifespan of any empire.